Regent Marchi.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Highlands Homecoming 2020. My name is Frank Marchi. I am a graduate of the class of 67. Two of my children and their spouses are also graduates of Highlands, and we currently have 3 grandchildren attending our great university. For many years, the fall was a time to return to Las Vegas, meet with old friends, talk about the old days, watch the parade, attend football and most recently rugby games, and participate in all the functions of Highlands Homecoming. We're attending again this year, but in a virtual way. I've been involved with Highlands for as long as I can remember, and also the Las Vegas community. I'm currently, as Regent Garcia said, a member of the Board of Regents. I continue to remain involved in Highlands, not only for what Highlands has done for me, but I believe in Highlands and all that it does to provide opportunity for those current students and future students to come. Welcome to our Zoom presentation on the review of the strategic plan. As important as what a strategic plan is that Regent Garcia referenced is the process by which the document was established. Doctors Williamson and Romero led this effort and organized a number of campus-wide meetings in which the document was discussed. Not only faculty and staff participated in this process, but the community was invited and received as well. The final document is a compilation of that process and many, many different ideas from the HU community. It is a complex report. It takes personal understanding and commitment to achieve. The Board of Regents approved this document on October the 9th. Doctors Williamson and Romero, co-chairs of the University-wide Planning Committee, are with us today, and they're going to discuss the specific goals and objectives of our strategic plan, how they were developed, and how its use can help Highlands accomplish its mission. Please welcome Dr. Williamson and Dr. Romero.
Thank you, Regent Marchi and Regent Garcia. First thing I want to say is I really appreciate the honor of being able to be a co-chair on this committee with Eric, and I think Eric feels the same way. It was a great honor to be involved in such a task. I'll briefly introduce myself as well. I've been at Highlands since 2004. I first became acquainted with New Mexico. I think it was 1993 when I took a spring break trip down here in probably a 1970s Honda Civic and landed in the Gila Valley barely with 4 or 5 of my friends. Fell in love with the landscape and fell in love with the landscape in the Southwest more generally. So when I had the opportunity after graduate school at University of Minnesota to apply to a job here at Highlands and then received interviews here and everything, I was delighted to come to Highlands. I'm a psychology professor, still really, I guess, but I was actively involved in that pursuit from 2004 to 2018. I've been in administration since then as the Associate VP of Academic Affairs, Grants and Contracts. I also have family connections here now as well. Melissa received her Master's of Social Work. My wife, Melissa, received her MSW here. And Henry, my stepson, Henry Robertson, is currently in the forestry program. And he's actually also studying language interpretation with Carol Litherland, who is here. And it's nice to actually, this is the first time I've been on a talk where my words have been interpreted. So that's another great honor for today. That's a first for me. So, in going over the strategic plan, I think we'll first introduce Eric or have him introduce himself, and then we'll share some slides and go over this plan with everyone, and then invite the feedback as Regent Garcia has said it, as well as Q&A. So Eric, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Mi buenos días, le de Dios. Me quedo ante ustedes, su humilde servidor, Eric Romero. I am your humble servant, Eric Romero. It's a pleasure to be here. And again, you know, as one of the culminating activities of this process that we've been involved in for more than a year now. Again, appreciations to Regent Garcia and Regent Marchi for organizing this, and with the insight that they provide as far as really kind of rolling it out and starting to work with it. Well, the first level of work, we had a significant collaboration, and we're going to speak to that to some degree, but now the work begins, and we really need to kind of embrace what the plan is suggesting and incarnate the different kinds of goals and objectives. And that's going to be a beautiful process in and of itself. So again, we're going to address a little bit where that process is, because we're very proud of the process, because it was very, very participatory. I also do want to recognize that Dr. Edward Martinez, Dr. Let's see, she was up there. Dr. Rebecca Moore Maldonado was there, and Inca Crispin are in the audience, and they were also contributed significantly. We're members of the committee. So again, we share our dynamic relationships of how that panned out. I originally came here to Highlands. I've been here 25 years. Originally, I was invited by Paul Martinez to coordinate the U.S. Team's Multicultural Education Project, which was 25 years ago. So I was with the Center for the Education Study Diverse Populations for about 12, 13 years as a senior research associate. And for the last 15 years, I've been a faculty member in the Department of Language and Culture, that which right now I'm the interim department chair. Work with the University Studies program, I teach some of the Spanish classes every once in a while, and I work with the Native American Hispano Cultural Studies program. For the last 5, 6 years, I've also had the privilege of working with what is now the President's Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so we've had that's part of the dynamic that you're going to see is inserted within the strategic planning discussions throughout. So again, thank you for inviting us to be able to share this. And besides it being a presentation, we'd like to make it as a celebration and a call for us to continue to do the work and to continue in the dialoguing process of how important this document could be for the direction of the university.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I'll begin to share my screen now. And I'm going to okay, I'm still adjusting I'm also using my second screen to look at the audience as well. So I just wanted to get that all squared on my own computer. Okay, so does everyone see the screen? Okay, we're good on that. Okay, so we already did introductions, and now we'll get into the discussion of what strategic planning is, what our strategic plan ultimately came out to be, and some next steps. And I'll start with what strategic planning is in a very, nuts and bolts, basic way, because, at the end of the day, strategic planning is just goal setting for the university. It's just coming forward and figuring out what it is we want to do as an institution. And what makes that challenging is a few things that have to be kept in mind when you do that. First of all, you have to share this discussion with as many people as you can for as long as you can in doing so, because that will be more likely to secure buy-in from the membership. So that is, to the extent that you engage the community members in this process, the more likely it is that there'll be follow through after the process as well. And so we will talk a little bit about how we did that, and we will also talk about two of the other challenges, which are the strategic plan has to be translatable to individual units or areas of work around campus, whether those are academic units like psychology or Spanish, or something like finance and administration or IT. People have to be able to realize those objectives in their own individual units. And then the third piece is that these objectives have to be measurable. That is you have to be able to track progress. You have to be able to know you're getting from point A to point B, or if you're not. So those are really the three things that we had in mind as we developed this plan. And we just developed this plan over a year and 3 or 4 months. So it happened over a long period. And these were at the forefront of our mentality, if you will, as we were developing the plan. So we engaged broad participation in strategic planning. We engaged faculty members by asking for volunteers from the faculty senate body. We asked for a student representative as well, and for a while it was Carla Espinosa, and then when Tamlin Crane became the chair of the student senate, then she took over as the student representative. There are a number of us from across various campuses that we have, or various centers that we have in staff and administration, as well as different units. Inca Crespin, for instance, came from the registrar. Patrick Wilson is from online education, and Buddy Rivera from Farmington. And then we also brought in community members. We brought in Sarah Harris, which was very nice to have. She's a Spanish faculty emeritus, who's now a retired member in our community. And Vince Howell, who for a while was actually the pro tem mayor of Las Vegas, New Mexico. So these are the folks that we brought in and engaged in a dialogue with. And I'm going to let Eric take over from here on this slide.
Okay, I was muted there. So again, as Ian mentioned, you know, we were cognizant and specific in the manner of how we pulled the committee together that was truly representative of the different entities on campus and off campus as well. And part of that intention was, again, because the necessary dialogue as far as looking through the different steps that we were going to work with. So one of our first activities, once we really composed ourselves as a committee, was to look at what the mandate was from HLC, you know, how they were referring to the previous plan and looking, and eventually we do have some of the carryover from the previous plan that was tied into this. So there was a lot of different things that we had to bring in place. So looking at HLC, looking at other different strategic planning, we did look at New Mexico State University, John Carroll and Sul Ross, and extracted from those areas, from those plans, areas that we felt that we were valuable to Highlands and in alignment with our identity as well. So the first level, we discussed some of these ideas and started designing, having a discussion of how would we have them? Would we have goals, objectives, measurables, what level of accountability was going to be? So at the very beginning, there was significant discussion about the overall, the 20,000 foot view ideas as to what the planning would be and how it would be rolled out. Again, we started with our survey activity. So in the spring of the year, we had a 17-point survey that went to the different constituencies and different entities. And that was, first of all, to identify the goals. So the feedback that we got from that, we drew it down from the 17, reduced it, and came up with 5 or 6. And then had another follow-up survey that went again out to not only community, but the faculty senate, the staff senate, The Student Senate executive management team had discussion of this as well. And so this back and forth happened on 2 or 3 different occasions to make sure that what we were presenting and what our internal discussion was, that there would be some bearing and certainly dialogue with our community at large. And eventually, so we developed what we had is the 5 goals and the attendant objectives. And again, that's what was presented to the Board of Regents now. And again, Regents Marchi and Garcia, thank you for allowing that discussion to take place and demonstrating your support. So what we have in place right now is a document for the university to work with. But part of our discussion was what else needs to be done as far as what follow-up activities need to be done. And we hope that includes either the determination of another level of planning committee to work with, but really continuing with the communication with staff, faculty, students, and community to make sure that, you know, this isn't a plan that just stays up on the shelf, but it in fact becomes a living document that guides many of our decisions here at the university.
So I just want to highlight a couple of areas of that. One is we, in addition to surveying, so we did these formal surveys where we got 300 responses and then 150 responses. So we got a lot of feedback from the university community through those surveys. But we also dialogued with folks. So we went out to the regional educational cooperative here. We went out to Luna. We talked to folks at Kiwanis in Las Vegas. We had folks go out to the centers and have conversations. So we had conversations as well because we wanted qualitative feedback as well as quantitative feedback on what it is people wanted to see on the plan. And Eric and Rebecca and Edward and Inca were all instrumental in this. So folks who are right here today did a lot of that, going out to the community. A few times we went to the Students Senate and they meet on Sundays. So we went out on Sundays and talked to folks at the Students Senate. Kim Blea was involved in that. So we just want to highlight that we dialogued with folks, we reviewed what people said, and that's how we ultimately selected. Basically, if the items were extremely unpopular, we didn't include them. And if they were popular, they became candidates for us. They weren't automatically, because we had to look at whether or not we had to change the wording based on some of the qualitative feedback. We had to look at what the committee thought was measurable. So we looked at all of those pieces. And from all of that information, we winnowed it down to those 5 goals. And again,
if I could add to that, Ian, again, that process of looking at the measurability, because that was a very significant internal discussion, is determined, because again, you know, to have it as a deliverable that could actually be utilized, that was a key discussion for us to really look at the document and the different goals and objectives we were working with, to make sure that they were viable and translatable to different kind of units and different entities. So in some sense, we had to make it a little bit more generalized so as to be able to work with the different constituencies, the different communities that are part of the university, the Highlands community. And so again, in the manner of how we developed them out, that was in mind, that once the units got it, that they would be able to interpret and fill out the blanks in some of the generalized statements that are in the plan.
Thanks for that additional piece, Eric. So here is the plan. I just queued it up for all of you to see. Here are the 5 goals, and then after that, we'll go into the objectives. We don't have a whole lot of time, so we'll go over this pretty quickly. But it is up, and it is a matter of public record and public document. But if you do want a copy of it and you don't have it, I'm happy to email it to you if you email me as well. So these are the 5 goals, and I'll just cover them briefly. Goal 1 is the main academic mission in our view. It's teaching students academically on a number of different ways. 1, we're hitting on essential skills. Essential skills is something that actually comes to us from the higher education department in New Mexico as well, that we must teach to 5 essential skills, and they include things like critical thinking, communication, personal and social responsibility, and digital literacy. Informational and digital literacy are 4 of the skills. So we teach students skills. We teach them curriculum. That is that they need to know content knowledge. They need to know, if they're in psychology major, they need to know psychology. If they're a sociology major, they need to know sociology. But we also teach them breadth of understanding. That is they're supposed to get a liberal arts education that includes a broad set of essential courses that they need to take. So they need to take some foreign language courses. They need to take a little bit of science and math, a little bit of English, etc. So that's part of what we're doing. And then finally, interdisciplinary understanding. So we're encouraging folks to look beyond their majors and their areas of specialization, but also to think of connections between those areas. So that's
Ian,
that.
Ian, if I could add a little bit more comment to that. Again,
Sure.
you know, this was kind of within the internal discussion of the committee, is recognizing that students, many of the students that come to Highlands or in college in general, they almost look at the university as 2 separate curriculums, that which they work with in their core curriculum, and then they get into the meat and they get into the content within their major and the minors. And a lot of research out there, and we drew from, we spoke about different documents, different think tank documents as well, that kind of suggests that this sort of goal, as we have stated, helps us to really address this area of the interdisciplinary and the articulation between core learning, core curriculum learning with content knowledge. So I think we have a summation type of goal right there that helps us to be able to work with that idea of bringing it together so that there's articulation between what they do their freshman year and what they do their senior year.
That's right. So that's another kind of interdisciplinarity between the core and the major. The goal 2 was really looking beyond folks just as students, but thinking of students as leaders and thinking of students as needing experiences outside of the classroom. So we also looked to some language such as inspire. So we're thinking, okay, we're not just teaching students, we want to inspire them to be leaders. We want them to think about regional and global issues. We want to engage them to be able to engage the world as they, after they receive their education and go out into the community. So a lot of goal 2 is around this idea of education as a fully immersive experience with internships and externships and involvement in co-curricular activities that further enhance, and community involvement that further enhance themselves as students. So that's number 2. That's what we're thinking about with number 2. Number 3, we wanted to look at the university as engaging the community, town and gown relationships, as they're sometimes called. So this is thinking about how we go out and we meet with folks from Lanel. This is how we go out and meet with the city and the businesses in the city of Las Vegas or the city of Rio Rancho, and engage those community partnerships with staff, with faculty, with students, with administration, so that we can look for mutually beneficial exchanges. And the mutual benefit piece is an addition, we thought, from last strategic plan. So we really emphasized that mutuality of how can we find ways that we can benefit each other, community and the university. Did you want to add to that one, Eric?
Yeah, just in the sense that oftentimes when you see that sort of a goal written in to a strategic plan, it may be limited to look at kind of job market preparedness, that there's alignment with what we do with education, that there's some job skills preparation for students to go out. But we approach it with a much larger lens and really looking also in recognizing that there's practical knowledge that's out there in the community, funds of knowledge and different kind of opportunities for learning. And to the degree that we work mutually with our community entities, we could ensure that there's a practicality to learning, potentially even placement and development, community development potential could come out of that. But really working and recognizing where not only our feeder communities are, but extending on larger communities and making that part of the mission of the university, that we have that civic responsibility to do problem solving within our communities as well. And so it requires those levels of dialogue and structured dialogue and structured type of programming to make sure that there's a sustainability when we do establish partnerships.
Good. Eric, do you want to jump into 4 right away?
Yeah, if I can, just as stated in what you could see on the PowerPoint, advance excellent diversity, equity, inclusion policies and practices. Now, in the previous strategic plan, we have diversity identified as a value of the university, but it really wasn't, fleshed out to really give a stronger idea of what this would mean and the different levels of where we could look at diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So I'm proud to see that this was one that was very well supported with the levels of the surveys and the different kind of internal dialogues and the discussions with the different senates and community members. We felt that there was a very significant need to start working in this direction of really panning out and designing out how we're going to work with diversity, equity, inclusion issues, and develop it to a degree that it becomes very significantly part of the identity of the university. For me, I often mention that, there's a marketability that goes along with this idea of saying that, of attracting students that besides their content knowledge, that they come to the university, they come to Highlands University specifically because of curricular, co-curricular, and community-oriented activities that allow them to be more aware of cultural diversity and the skills and the abilities to be able to work forward to make sure that equity and inclusion issues are brought about. So I'm really proud that we got this one in there, and we got it in there with 5 objectives that give some support that'll go to the individual units for them to be able to working with how they're individually or at the unit level, how they're going to work with some of these initiatives.
And as Eric says, this is one of our strongest worded goal, especially in terms of its objectives and the level of detail in the objectives, as well as just the number of objectives. So we put a lot of meat behind our diversity inclusion, and we think that's very appropriate. Being an HSI institution and an aspiring NTI institution, which is Native American serving non-tribal institution, we're very near having that status demographically. We're like 0.5% away. And it would be a very important thing for Highlands to also attain that status. And we put that in one of our objectives. And so it's a very specific goal. It's a very specific objective. And that's true throughout this section of our document, we believe. So the last goal, and then I think we should jump to next steps and skip over objectives, because I think for time we have to move it to next steps in that discussion and ask for questions and respond. The last goal really centers on this idea of accessibility. That is, we want to be a comprehensive educational institution means that we're wanting to reach out to everyone. Traditional students, non-traditional students, adult learners, distant students, folks in various communities around New Mexico, and lifelong learners. So what we're really hitting on here is just this notion of accessibility and comprehensiveness. That is, and what that means really is that no matter how they're accessing Highlands, they have an equal quality education. So if they're at the centers, or if they're online, they're getting equal quality education than if they're on the Las Vegas campus. And that's a real priority for us in that 5th goal. So turning to the next steps. in conclusion, the first thing we wanted to highlight is we really believe this is an improvement to the 2020 plan in a couple of ways. One is we spent a lot of time in that community outreach piece in dialogue, and we think we did more of it than they did in the prior plan. We think we reached out a lot more. We used that to make decisions about items, and we used that to do a lot of wordsmithing. So you'll see that the current set of goals, even though there's 5 as opposed to 6, have less repetitive language and have more developed language. Secondly, there are now objectives underneath those goals. So therefore, it's a more specific plan and it is built out more. There's more meat on the bones. And so we think this is an improvement, and it's the kind of improvement our accreditor was looking for. But it's also the reason that our accreditor looks for that is it makes it more likely for us to enact the plan. That is, we're more likely to realize something that's more specific because we can get down to what it actually means, rather than being something that's at the 30,000 foot level and never comes down off the mountain, to use the hermit analogy, I guess, from earlier. So you gotta come back down from the mountain and look at what that means in specifics. And so that's where ongoing engagement of the university community is critical. And essentially, I wanted to highlight how these kinds of things are supposed to work, both at the executive level and the unit level. Basically, the plan, which is featured on the right side of this slide, is where it all starts. You come up with the plan, and here now we have a university plan. Well, the next thing is for the unit plans to align with the university plan. So everyone has to go around the university and figure out how their unit can align with the larger goals of the university. Then budgeting is supposed to follow from the plan. That is, the money trail should reflect our goals as an institution. And budgeting decisions are very real around this, right? So one of the goals in the prior plan was to develop strategic enrollment management. Well, there were real dollars that the president asked for and the Board of Regents granted to strategic enrollment management for the last 5 years because of this, okay? And we really built up our enrollment management system because of that. So it's important to understand budget follows from the planning. Then the actions then should follow from both the plan and the budget. That is the changes we make, the improvements we try to enact are implemented, put into place. And then we have to reflect on that. We have to go back, assess, and then report to ourselves, and also report to the Board of Regents, report to the HLC, report to all the various entities we have to report to about how we've done. Then we go back and we plan again, and we ask, what do we need to change? What do we need to adjust in terms of implementation and budgeting to get closer to realizing the plan? Goal setting, action, reflection leads to more goal setting, action, and reflection. It's an iterative process, or a cyclical process. Okay, the last thing I want to highlight is some of the key next steps. So we've added these objectives. Now we need a roadmap for the future. Highland still needs to get key performance indicators put together on the new strategic plan that are aligned with the goals and the objectives. Key performance indicators are this high-level set of measures or indicators that say you are meeting the goals that you set out for here, or you're meeting these objectives. So we need to have university-level indicators that tell us whether or not we're approaching the goal or not. And so that's a next step. We need to develop those indicators. Another next step is unit plans. As I mentioned earlier, unit plans, budgets, and reporting now has to be aligned with our new 5-year plan. We need to look to engage and meet short-term and long-term goals within that plan. And then finally, all of this would mean that we're complying with our accreditor, the HLC. And I guess I would like to note that it's important, as we had a discussion about this, Frank and Bill and Eric and I, and it isn't just that we're complying with the HLC. It's for us. It's not, Highlands is for us. It's not for HLC. And the only thing our accreditor's doing is they're coming and saying, are you achieving the things you say you're wanting to achieve or not? And if you are doing that, then they'll accredit us. And if you're not, or you're drifting, or you're not paying attention to your goals, then they'll have a problem with us. They don't have a problem if we're attempting to meet, but we're falling short in X, Y, and Z areas, and we're working on that. That's all good. It's just that the plan is something that should be aligned with our identity, and the accreditor's looking for follow through with that. And that's a good thing. And so sometimes we kind of think like we're doing it for the accreditor, and that's not how we want to think. We're doing it for ourselves, and the accreditor's checking to make sure we're accountable to that. So with that, I'd like to conclude and ask folks for questions to any of the members.
Yeah, Dr. Williamson, this is Bill Garcia. I just want to comment very quickly. Dr. Romero said the work now begins. I really believe that, because we have a plan, and as you indicated, the plan should drive the budgeting should drive achievements, and then achievements, the reports and accountability, and then readjust and reassess. So if we're all committed to this the way we should be, that's the cycle that we're going to follow. And many times developing the measurables is going to be a lot of work. What are these key performance indicators at the unit level, and how do they bubble up to the top, and what kind of performance indicators are we going to evaluate? I really believe that this has been a very positive experience. I hope everybody's committed to it. As a regent, I personally will look at this every regent meeting, and every budget that we have, and every program that comes up. I will be comparing it against the strategic plan. And there's short-term and long-term objectives, as you mentioned, and those will be important as well. I know in any organization I've ever been involved in, resources drive results. And we can't be everything to everybody. But if we can dedicate resources to those things we think about and mutually accept and identify, we can do a great job here. So I'll close with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We always have to think about resources. Yeah.
If I can mention again, for me, I'll reiterate the idea that what you mentioned is saying, really recognizing the process is the driver, in that dialogical process of that, we have communication going on. And I was really pleased to see that in one of the presentations that we worked with during the summer, we had presented the information for one of the levels of dialoguing with the staff senate. And it actually in the staff senate, in that meeting itself, it turned out that, we presented the information of what we were working with, and we got some feedback. But there was an immediacy in their wanting to work with it. They started already detailing out some of the specific goals and objectives that they wanted to work with. So there's some anticipation for this. And I think that's, again, going to be part of the practicalities, because they were involved with the process. So the different staff, student, and faculty entities, as well as the executive management team, they know this is coming about. So I think there's some anticipation and some synergy that's going to carry over into making it happen, because we did take our time with the process to make sure to include these entities within the discussions.
This is Frank Marchi. I would just like to echo what Regent Garcia said. We're not going to leave this plan on the shelf. I think in the past what has happened is we did a great lot of work. We put it on the shelf and never looked at it again until 5 years was up. In the past, we have done that, but I think we have made tremendous progress because we have the plan, but in addition to that, we have the metrics and look through it. I've been on the board for a while, and if you just look back, one of the things we did was we had a problem with the budgeting. We put together a much more transparent budget, and now that is flowing quickly. We've improved our graduation rates, our recruitment efforts are much improved. And I think that what we're hoping to do now, as we get these metrics put together, part of the addition to the plan is how do we continue working on the educational quality, which is one of the key areas that you have in your objectives and goals. So just want to let you know that both Regent Garcia and I are committed to be sure that we work through this. This is the focal point, that it's sort of the start of how we get things done. So thank you.
Wonderful. I just want to let everybody know, if you have a question, you either can unmute your microphone, or you're also welcome to type it in the chat if you'd like. We'll be keeping an eye on that. So any other questions?
Carol, I think on the grant that you're planning to submit for the IGE, we can work in alignment to mission, right?
I sent you and Edward email while you guys were talking, but when I had looked at the strategic plan last week, I thought that it was like totally aligned with what we have been talking about for this innovations in graduate education. And so anyway, I agree totally. It's great. A lot of just the language and just even listening to you describe it even more, actually, I think fits really well with where we want to go. So I was pretty excited about it.
Great.
I have one other question, just and thinking about it, we did at the last strategic plan, did think, you know, quite a bit of time of how we were going to follow up with each one of the goals and how we could make that more of a living document. Anyway, I just wondered if you have thought about, you know, I mean, we really struggled with trying to think about each goal and how do you follow that every year and think about that. And I didn't know if you guys have thought about that in terms of, you know, we ended up kind of saying that each one of the VPs was responsible for an area and try to give a report every year. And not that they were totally responsible, but for sort of responsible for following that area. And I didn't know if you had thought about what you're doing with that.
I could answer that. I think that's a really good question, and I don't think we've resolved that issue. I think it's related to the key performance indicator question, but it's sort of related to the accountability question more generally. So who's sort of in charge? And if you don't have someone in charge, you know, is it really going to carry off? And I you know, it wasn't part of the charge of this committee, but I do think it's absolutely a vital piece of next steps. So I'm glad you bring it up because I mean, I think
that a lot.
Yeah, because you know, I mean, I think it's at unit levels, it's pretty obvious to me. It's directors, it's chairs, it's but when you're starting to look at it from sort of the higher levels or how it migrates upward to executive levels, I think that's a little bit more of a challenge.
You know, one thing I would have an interest in as a regent is understanding from the president's perspective, what are you going to do to drive this strategic plan now? How are you going to implement, make the words real and drive them throughout the organization? And in my view, I think that one of the challenges there is you got to get everybody to start thinking about what does this mean, each of these goals to my own unit, and what am I going to do to ensure that I'm achieving them. And I think it's going to take some back and forth, and it seems to me, I don't know what the president wants to do, but some kind of implementation team would make sense in my mind to kind of drive forward, because you have already had the practical experience of gathering it, developing it. Now the real work starts, as has been mentioned already, and that is how are we going to know if we're successful? What are the key performance indicators? How will I be evaluated with respect to the strategic plan? What kind of resources can I expect in my program? And one of the questions would be, well, what are you doing to drive all of the goals? So it's got a lot more work, but that's what these plans do. They drive that kind of collective, collaborative attitude throughout the organization.
And I think that's a key question, you know, kind of the implementation and certainly the accountability. And so we certainly have an umbrella accountability entity in the HLC that we have to attend to. But I agree with what Ian mentioned. It says that the design of this strategic plan was internal to the university. We're in compliance with what HLC wants to see, and we're going to report it to it. But that's not the entity that's going to hold us to the accountability to make sure that there's adherence to the policy, to the plan itself. So I think those are some key questions that now that we have a strategic plan as a tangible, and it got approved by by regions as well. Now it's back on the desk of administration, and for them to determine, is there going to be another level of committee planning or other levels of dialoguing with the constituent entities to make sure that there's agreement in where that implementation and accountability, and particularly at the budget end, again, because as Regent Marchi mentions, you know, you have to have the resources to be able to work with the plan, and so that's part of that accountability cycle as well.
So
Edward, I think you wanted to come. Oh.
Yeah, excuse me, Bill. Well, a strategic planning committee already exists, and it's out of a committee that the provost office has brought together. And I think I believe, yes, I agree that we need to have key performance indicators, but I believe that this committee is the committee that oversees the maybe not the implementation, but oversees that the individual units are beginning to build their own strategic plans that would fulfill the university's strategic plan. And so the committee already exists. There's already a process that is in place that asks for each individual unit to begin to build their unit strategic plan off of the university strategic plan in the fulfillment of that plan.
Okay, great.
And so then that in itself, then it falls on each individual unit supervisor to begin to think about how they're going to make sure that their unit is implementing what they say that they will do. And then within the process, we also have the closing the loop part of this, where every year around this time of the year, the provost office asks for each unit to submit their report and indicate what it is that they've accomplished or not accomplished, and provide some feedback as to why they did or they didn't. And so I believe that the process is already in place. The committee already exists. And right now, I would say that the accountability falls on the supervisors and or managers of those individual units to make sure that that work is being done. But I do agree that some key performance indicators do need to be developed around this new strategic plan and these new objectives that we have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Martinez. I'm glad to hear that there's an organization that is focused on the next steps here. Have you developed timetables with those within that group?
Well, yeah, and like I said, I don't want to speak for the provost here, but the process, we've been following this process for the past 3, 4, 5 years. And so I don't know whether that timeline will be tweaked or not, but that process exists. Around this time of the year, we're producing, each unit should be producing the report that provides information on whether or not they achieved their goals from the previous year. Now, towards the end of this semester, early spring semester, the provost will be asking for the new strategic plan from each of the units to be created for the following year. So there is a timeline. And like I said, I'm not sure if the provost and the strategic planning committee are going to stick to that timeline, or if they're going to tweak it at this time with a new plan.
So I have a few comments, Edward, in response. I think you're absolutely right insofar as unit strategic planning, that part of the next steps is absolutely already in place and has been in place. And we do have reporting out that has to happen now in the early fall from the prior activities from last year that are based on the old strategic plan. There's currently budgeting going on, and so part of what we're facing now is a timing issue, because the provost did put out a call that budgets should, to her units already, that budgets now should align immediately with the new strategic plan. So she wants that to be immediate. And in fact, there's a budgeting meeting with the provost and her units this afternoon. So yes, there are activities already taking place, and they're already starting to align with the strategic plan. What's a little tricky is unit planning is coming after budgeting now, and that's unusual, right? So budgeting has to happen, but unit planning normally precedes budgeting. But in this case, we have to budget quickly, and we do want to align it with the university-wide strategic plan, but we haven't done those unit alignments yet. So there's just some issues like that. But I think the big thing that I want to highlight is this will be a challenge of coordination and aggregation. So units will have the things that they need to do to meet those goals that are aligned with the university strategic plan. But key performance indicators really are supposed to happen at this 30,000 foot level. And so the units sort of aggregate or put together something that collectively makes for a key performance indicator. And the key is, how do we coordinate making sure that all that stuff is tracked so that we meet the key performance indicator from all those little pieces underneath. And I think that that's a problem we haven't fully resolved at Highlands.
Thank you so much. Bill, did you want to add something before we wrap up here?
I think Mr. Garcia had something.
Yes, and I know we have to sign off here, but and so people need to leave, that's fine. But I would like for Ian and Dr. Martinez and Eric and Frank at a minimum to stay on here, because I have a question. I was just thinking about 40% of all the revenue that is generated to operate the university comes from the state. That number continues to be less and less every year. So a question that I have is this: where in this strategic plan do we address the need to increase funding from both the state level? I mean, can we get more of that from the federal level and then from other areas? Where it seems to me a strategic plan should reflect that need. So Ian, let me start with you and see.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. I think you're right. Maybe we let folks go and then we'll have that conversation.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a big question, right?
Well, it's something that I think of as a region. You know, resources we know drive everything, and as the resources percentage-wise continue to drop, what are we doing? What are we thinking about? And what actions are we taking in order to attract additional resources? I think that's an important question. And
it's fundamental.
Yeah.
I think it is a fundamental question for a university to ask. Regent Garcia, I don't know if it's something that's immediately addressed by the strategic plan. It is absolutely a requirement of our accrediting body that we stay financially viable. And the financial viability hopefully comes from some of these goals. So for instance, becoming a comprehensive provider and an accessible provider and becoming a quality institution should increase enrollments, right? So if you're training leaders and you're training folks to really understand their content areas, and you're reaching out to folks across the state to get them into these programs, that would be goals 1, 2, and 5. Then the last piece is you got to get the word out that you're doing that, right? And that's the marketing piece. And I think that's always been a little bit of an issue for us is like putting a marketing budget together and engaging the marketing side and some of those things that's not explicitly addressed. Now the committee had long dialogue about this issue of strategic planning versus operational planning. And the idea was we absolutely have to take care of operations in order to meet our strategic plan. And that was the thinking that the committee landed on. I have to share with you also that wasn't, there was some dissent on this issue as well. So there were folks who met with us, the committee at the end, and said, we should have more in here about finance. And actually Denise is on the call. So Denise, you can even maybe add to that. But the committee at that point was sort of about 90% done with our work. And we already had a plan that had gone through several endorsements. And so it was like, well, we think that there's some good ideas here is what we ended up telling the president. But we feel like we need to get this to the board now. And so that was kind of how that conversation ended. But in terms of, but I think you're right in terms of, do we think more about, another piece that came up in that dialogue, by the way, is IT. So there was some discussion about if IT needs to be more centrally located in the strategic plan as well. It didn't ultimately make the cut, but part of that was because of where we were in process as well. So I think I've captured it. You know, Eric and Edward, you can share more if I didn't capture our discussion, but that was what, and Denise, I know it looks like you want to talk as well.
I'll go ahead and let Dr. Romero talk and then
Denise, go ahead.
I do think that there's a gap in the plan that speaks directly to operational excellence and financial sustainability long-term. I reviewed some of the institutions in New Mexico that had a direct link to the strategic plan for those areas, because that's part of the foundation that helps the academic be successful and the student support services be successful as well. And the committee did bring up that it had gone through a series of approvals through various constituents, but I do think there's an opportunity to be more inclusive of operations. And if you notice, and I think this was just an oversight and unfortunate along the way, that anyone from administration was not included on that team that originated this plan. So if anybody has ideas in how we can connect specifically to the strategic plan, we're certainly open to listening to those and developing those as we move along and contribute to the institution.
Eric, I would like to suggest so we had written about this issue to the president as well, so he is aware of it. And we did bring up this idea that maybe what we do is pass the plan and then invite one more goal next year that would address this potential gap. And so that was something that was suggested as, if that's the will of executives, if that's the will of the BOR, by all means. But we wrote that in the letter. So it was just sort of like, okay, if we want to think more about finance and operations and we want to give them a clear place in the plan, probably the best way forward might be to do invite one more goal and object, because we were kind of at the end. And the other thing is that there were no yet objectives we'd created. So there were maybe these goals, but then that would have to be involved development in the same way that we developed the other goals and objectives. And so that would take a little bit of time. We could maybe even do it in a couple months. But anyways, those were some thoughts too that I wanted to add in direct response.
You know what this points out to me is that this is a great quality discussion and that the plan has had an excellent start. But as we know, part of the whole plan always is to adjust and adapt. And maybe one of the adjustments that we look at is that piece right there. I like, Denise, what you said about operational excellence and institutional excellence, because you know, one thing that the regents are interested in is how do we provide the compensation necessary to attract and retain the very best faculty and staff at the institution, because you know there's a fundamental belief that that's what drives enrollment. As your reputation as an institution improves or whatever, that will have more people looking at you. So I mean, these are real issues, and we got to figure out how do we put our arms around them through the review of this whole strategic process. And that, of course, is operational funding.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is, again, recognizing, you know, what was the charge to the committee, and the committee was charged with, let's look at a vision, a trajectory, and then continue to work with, you know, how do we operationalize, and then with the operationalization coming into place, then we could better determine where budget allocation needs to be. For me, one of the issues is kind of the cycles that we're working with, because as a unit, again, I'm chair of language and culture. Just last week and today is the last level of the budget discussion that's going to come into place for fall semester of next year. So again, there was a misalignment with the budgeting cycle in the strategic plan, given that Dr. Gonzalez, Roxanne, did ask the units in our planning for the budget submission that we just submitted Friday to consider the new strategic plan, but we really didn't have time to discuss it. It was just too new for us to be able to embrace it, even though the department I work with, because of my relationship with the department, they were familiar with what the strategic plan potentially was going to do. So we had discussion, but we didn't have planning time that we could tie it in with key performance indicators, with, again, specifically how are we going to address it. So there was a misalignment with the budgeting cycle, but I think Ian addressed it to some degree in saying that, you know, once we get past this budgeting cycle and we start with the unit level planning and we have a stronger determination of the tangibles and the operationalization of the plan, then it translates into being budget criteria, and we could tie it in with budgeting for subsequent years, and maybe again tying up the strategic plan with adding that additional objective, which demonstrates an accountability that there has to be fiscal allocation to be able to support the plan itself.
I guess the only thing I would like to add is, as this plan goes forward, one of the things that we truly need to understand at the level of the planning is, what is our capacity? How much resources do we have available? And so it looks like as we begin to ask for resources, if we understood what was available, and then what other sources are there? Because really what you can look at, the only sources we really have at the university level is tuition. We don't have much control over what the state provides, but however, as Regent Garcia said, excellence in looking at our programs and looking at the quality of our professors will then bring us to have people want to come on board. And I think that's the long-term goal.
Yeah. Edward.
If I may add, I agree with some of what Denise added, this operational financial piece that is missing. And right now, I think some of these pieces that we believe are missing could be layered under the goals that are there now. It's not ideal. I agree with that. And I would be a proponent of an additional goal in the future, as Ian had explained, that maybe we can do that in the near future. But for now, I really believe if we look at the goal number 4 as an example, and to spin it off of what Frank just mentioned, the quality of teachers, and so I would think a quality and diversity of teachers would be very attractive to students. And when I say diversity, I mean in every sense of the word of diversity, not just race and ethnicity. And so if we're an institution that is hiring a diverse faculty, then that will also come out or show in terms of the quality of professors that we have, and that we embrace social justice and other issues. And so that's how that piece could fit under that goal. If we look at goal number 5, comprehensive educational provider for all students, including traditional, non-traditional, online, community, and lifelong learners, to me, that goal lends itself to the academic units to come up with innovative programs that may create or develop credentialing or other bachelor's or master's degrees that then engage our diverse faculty, that then can increase the reputation of our institution, at the same time, hopefully increase the enrollment numbers of our students, that then shows up in that bottom line that Frank just mentioned, right? Our tuition dollars. And so I think that our goals are fairly broad enough that if we are creative enough, we can fit these things into those goals. We just need to think about how we're going to do that, and really think about those things, our enrollment numbers and how that brings in tuition money, and think about how we can work with Denise and Max in engaging the legislature in maybe new innovative programs that they would be willing to support through other funds and things like this. And so I think that, and I really believe that that was the intent of the strategic plan, is to come up with goals that are broad enough that every unit within our institution could think of how they could develop their own goals to fulfill the broader goals, in terms of looking at how we can better support and sustain our institution. Maybe that hasn't been explicitly said, but I believe that that is one of the intents.
Can I just add one more item? When I think of operational excellence, I think of also technologies and the implementations of large-scale technology programs at Highlands. And I think about Banner and People Admin and Slate and the new program that's going to do the scheduling. I don't recall the name.
Ad Astra.
Ad Astra, thank you. You know, in order to get real efficiencies and improve our decision making based on data, those technology systems impacts all of us. And we saw that through the transition of online learning and having to provide a lot more functionality and training for the online training that we currently have through Brightspace. So when I think of operational excellence, it includes that. And whose job doesn't touch the enhancements that we've provided to the institution when technologies are concerned. So I know that this committee has done a tremendous amount of work, and I don't want to discount that whatsoever. I just think that we need to also focus on the actual administration of the university so that we can have successful academic programs and provide all the tools and resources to those who are directly servicing our students. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on administration's behalf.
I support what you just said, Denise, actually, and believe it or not, Denise. But what I would like to also add related to that is the marketing concern that has been brought up repeatedly on both sides of the house, and marketing our programs, and without a finance or marketing or an enrollment piece, are we thinking enough about the supply side of bringing students in, or are we thinking enough about in this plan? And I guess, I mean, and if I was to just say, if I didn't have other committee concerns, I'd probably say probably not enough. I would say that we need probably another goal would be nice, and if I felt like we could have added it at the tail end, then I think I would have pushed the committee to do so. And I think Edward felt the same way.
I agree. We deliberated quite a bit, and given the endorsements that had already happened, we felt that it would put us back another half a year. And so that's why I said earlier, I would be an advocate for an amendment to this plan with something like what we've been talking about here with this group, because I agree. I completely agree with what Denise has said. When I was managing the strategic enrollment division, I was a big advocate for Ad Astra and for Slate and for not People Admin, but the other one that I forget all the time.
Yes, the transfer evaluation software. Are you thinking of?
Yes,
Tutor Track.
The one in the business department, in the business area.
Oh, I don't know that.
Because those are technologies that if we, and this is another key thing here, is that if we utilize them to their full extent, then we can become more efficient and provide the service to our students in a more efficient manner. And so that's the key there also, is that we need to make sure that when we do bring in the technologies that we're bringing in, that we're not using them at 5 or 10%. And one clear example is when I started in 2016 in enrollment management, I did an assessment of our use of Banner through the financial aid office. And I learned that we were doing Banner 1999 in that office. And we worked very hard to get up to speed. And I think now we're in Banner 2010 or 2015 in that office. So there's still more room for improvement in that office and its use of Banner. But we brought in experts that were training us in how to do that. And so we do have to keep in mind that when we purchase software, that we fully utilize it. Otherwise, it just becomes a headache because we're not using it the way we should be.
So I think all of this does, I guess I also want to emphasize the tie between what Denise is saying and what, Bill, you opened this discussion up with, which is how are we funding the university? And I think that it is this full discussion sort of captures that concern.
I think it's been really quality discussion here, and I'm not detracting from the plan at all. But I think any plan should be subject to those kind of critical inquiries. And then we're doing the right thing. I think here we're discussing that. We're starting to see, well, maybe it ties in here. I definitely think the strategic enrollment management plan is a key to improving the number of students who come to Highlands who pay tuition. I mean, that's a way to fund it, but you know, it's the kind of quality discourse that this kind of plan should drive. So I'm pleased where we are now. I like the quality of the discussion. I appreciate Denise's input here. And I think it just says, well, now we go forward with all of this input and we think about how do we move the plan forward. And so there's a lot of good ideas. I look forward to hearing what you guys come up with.
And I would say kind of like a vice versa on that, because again, you know, we've had, this has been, you know, these last 15 minutes have been a clarifying discussion. Where else does this discussion have to take place? You know, not only administration, but really it's a regents discussion as well, because you're at that level to kind of say, well, we approve the plan. Now let's look at implementation and the adherence and the resource allocation that's going to support it. And that's certainly at your level, but a lot more than where at the level that I'm working at.
Yeah, we're all in this together. We're in the same boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess going even further than, I mean, you know, if there was an additional goal and objective and the region says, you know what, we really need this additional goal and objectives, and the original strategic plan set the floor, but we really need this one more. To me, that's, you know, we can go develop that. Well, yeah. If that's what you want.
Well, I think this, I'm going to visit with the other regions, but it has lifted in my mind a question that how do we want to do so many good things here, and the plan articulates that. I always think we should be thinking about that operational side though, and how are we going to fund it. And I think there's nuggets in there already that we can capitalize on, but I'm almost to the point of thinking maybe we need a separate goal here. And Dr. Romero, you're right. The regions need to take it up, and so we'll thrash it around. I believe in this constant up and down communication, you know, and sideways and whatever, however you want to characterize it. We all need to continue to communicate and think about what are we really talking about and what are the challenges to doing what we say we want to do. So this has been a great discussion from my point of view. I've learned a lot. I appreciate things that I didn't understand before, and I want to make it work with all the hard work that everybody's done.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it too.
Thank you so much for this presentation. That was great. And it is interesting you guys gave this talk and then had so much more to discuss still afterward.
It's not over.
Right.
It's not
Allow
over.
for that space.
Thanks, everyone.
Now I got to run to the provost budget meeting.
Yeah.
On to the next thing.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks again,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy the
Bye,
rest of
all.
homecoming.
See ya.